code review, whether it's human or an agent doing, has to happen much earlier, and it doesn't have to be reviewed. It could be a rubber ducking or a teaching moment. It also gives the developer space to ask those stupid, dumb questions to an LLM.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hunger DX. This is a podcast about developer experience and how engineering teams solve productivity challenges at scale. I'm your host, Ankit Jain, co founder of Aviator. At Aviator, we are building a verification platform for your AI generated code that creates guardrails to reduce slop. Today, my guest is Vanitha, joining in from Thoughtworks, and we will be talking about everything related to code reviews. So, Vanitha, thanks for making time to jump on this call. Can you please introduce yourself for the audience?
Of course. Thanks for the opportunity, Ankit. Vanitha Kumar, I'm based out of St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a technology consultant at Thoughtworks. I've been with Thoughtworks for a little over 4 years. I've been a full stack developer, infrastructure developer, enterprise architect, platform architect, and with Thoughtworks, I've done it all. I'm happy to have this conversation with Ankit because I'm very close to code and I will always be a developer at heart. So let's have at it. What are we going to talk about?
Amazing. So yeah, I mean, I believe everyone sort of like knows ThoughtWorks today. Kind of like, they've been in the industry for a long time, providing a lot of, I would say, guidance for how engineering should change and evolve. And so we are obviously in very interesting times where everything is changing, everything is turning upside down. So we want to talk about code reviews. I think a good place to start would be, what is a code review? Like, what does a code review as a practice even mean? And
Yeah.
like, if you have any thoughts on what, like, if you were to kind of like break it down, what is different parts of code reviews?
Of course, of course. I've had a transition of what a code review is throughout my career, and it's like more than 25 years long. With ThoughtWorks, my idea of what a code review has completely changed because, again, this is a culture where we follow trunk-based development, test-driven development, and pair programming as a religion, which means code review is not really a thing. It's not a ceremony per se. So code review for us has always been very light, very low effort, and all of the benefits you would get from code review has always been in the practice of while pair programming. It is something that happens organically. When you're trunk-based developing, so to speak, you do not hold on to a branch for weeks on end. And when you're writing tests sufficiently, like if your pipeline passes, that's good, right? Yeah. So the idea of code review has changed a lot for me. Earlier on in my career, it has always been I'm a junior developer, someone who's had much more context, knowledge, experience has been the one to look at it, tell me better ways of doing it, and use that also as an opportunity to educate, which I also appreciated. So there's different interpretation of what code review is. All of that is still relevant, still valuable. Where we all are thrown a monkey wrench at this point is the volume of code we to generate, and how on earth are we going to keep this practice of code review still relevant and meaningful in this time and age without holding on to our older beliefs of this is how it should be and we should continue doing it. So it's an interesting time. What have you been
Yeah,
seeing?
absolutely. If you think a little bit about, like, even the background and history of code reviews, it's like, it's not very old practice, right? I think code reviews really started maybe even 20 years ago. I remember like in 2006 was when Google started doing their code reviews. They kind of like introduced their internal practice of doing that. If you think about it, like a lot of like Windows original software was shipped without code reviews, right, and it's like today people feel that it is a very necessary key factor to kind of like doing and shipping software. Some of it is compliance. Generally, I talk about like code reviews also a theater these days. How have you seen sort of like it evolve? Do you see code reviews happening more today, and maybe because of AI kind of like we are also moving in a different direction? Maybe we need to rethink why, like, do we even need to do code reviews? So kind of like, have you seen any patterns
Yeah,
evolve or change?
like you mentioned, the trajectory has been we started with code review meant for something, and at this point, by default, everyone thinks code review as something that happens pre-integration, right? That's the only place we do code review, nowhere else. Not before, not after that one point. It's almost like a muscle memory. That's the stage we do, and that's the only stage we should be doing. There's been thought leadership around like, no, like that should not be the only place. And there was no forcing function to put that thought into practice. now that we have these powerful agentic AI and agentic IDEs helping us to produce more code, now the traction behind should pre-integration be the only time where we do code review, everyone's starting to think about it because these agents are so good at writing code that the correctness, the integrity of the code, so to speak, and is it doing what it's supposed to do? Like, yeah, for 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 most part, it does. Where the gap could rightly originate is at the time of the developer expressing the intent to the IDE. That's where you want to catch, right? Again, I'm loosely saying as expressing intent. We know how that turns out. It's like tens and 24 markdown files per feature at least, right? How do you review this? And most times we don't even version control those files. What's worth version controlling? What's not worth version controlling is another debate, right? Do you version control every markdown, every pattern? No, right? So uh, the idea of what is worth code reviewing has shifted, right? Either people want to review only the specs or specs and code, or they don't care. We just will test the running system because the volume is so much more. So that is starting to shift. What do we review? Again, how do we review is also changing. Again, purely because of the volume, because most of us who are used to seeing this in whatever tooling of your choice know if it spans more than 5 pages, it's too much for a human to connect the dots between what was the intended change and changes across 5 different files. It's a lot. Imagine that multiplied 10 times at least. Then the way you visualize change also has to evolve, right? You want to change the original intent. You may want to change, see the path your agent took, what's it's called agent traces, and the code. And did you practice follow all the ADRs? And by the way, where are the ADRs in my workspace? So you kind of start to have this broad dashboard of sorts to be able to do code review. It's not just diff anymore, right? It's not just diff and the ticket. You need a lot more inputs for the human to do code review if they have to do code review to the same extent that they have been doing in the past. So how you do it and what you review has drastically changed, and all of us are trying to grapple with how do we handle it. Some people have applied lever on the front end, meaning like I'll just review the spec, just all like trust in God. Some still take the pain and want to review every single artifact, acknowledging fully well that that is starting to become bottleneck in itself. So yes, the what and how is fundamentally shifting under our foot.
Interesting. So I have like this thing which we were talking about before, right? So I feel code reviews are not just about code reviews, right? Like there is an aspect of collaboration, an aspect of knowledge sharing, which is why in some ways code reviews have been very helpful, right? Like you were talking about, like as a senior engineer, you're providing feedback to sort of like people who are joining the company or like our juniors. And, maybe if you're a junior, you kind of like get that feedback and collaborate and learn more about better practices. So from that perspective, it does feel like we should use some degree of code reviews to make sure we continue having a collaboration, right? I think what we're talking about here is potentially changing the shape, right? So it's more about how do we actually manage the volume of code which is getting created with agents, build enough confidence and trust that like this code is going to do the thing it's supposed to do while making sure that we can actually still have a space for learning, collaboration, and arguing and debating on the architectures, right? In some ways, like I feel like humans have the biggest value that humans provide in the entire software development lifecycle is the judgment and the decisions.
Yep.
And that is a part that we still need to somehow keep,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
right? So,
Yeah.
so, so I guess like maybe sort of like if you have any thoughts on this direction, you already covered some shape is potentially different, but like have you been talking to some of your clients and like you obviously like have a huge customer base as well. What has been sort of their opinion on this, and sort of like there is a bit of a huge cultural shift or sort of like it's a people problem, a process problem, less so than a tooling problem.
course, there is also a philosophical debate about the question you're asking, and it's in everybody's mind. Should the change should the change sets be this large? Like over decades, we have always thought like smaller chunks, faster feedback. But now we have kind of thrown that principle out of the window. There is that philosophical debate of should we encourage this culture and habit of bigger change sets, and the other is the tribal knowledge, right? The reviewer having that, hey, there's a library for handling dates in our platform, and it's been around for years. That's what you should be using, but you haven't had the knowledge of it the 3 weeks you were building a feature, right? I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, but the idea is that you kind of have this enterprise context. So you kind of take that gap or take that opportunity for collaboration away from the humans and you kind of build the enterprise context for it. It's good, it'll scale, it'll work well, but it also takes the opportunity for collaboration. Those things are what I would challenge, and I would also reflect about your questions. But what we are seeing with our clients is um, the acknowledgement and also the reckoning that some of their old practices they'll have to step back and see if they're worth keeping and worth pursuing in the extent that they have practiced all these years. So we've had clients where we have piloted spec-driven development, which means there is huge amounts of markdown files. This particular client has always had the habit of reviewing documentation. Consulting companies like us produce. We are not full-time employees, so anyone who's not a full-time employee, the document they produce should also be reviewed. And we present them, hey, here are the markdown files. Here's where our documentation is. They're like, this is huge number of documentation. And then we produce code. The code volume is also large because we are able to produce larger change sets. They've come to a realization that doing the code reviews or reviews of any sort the same old fashioned way in this time and age will end up them being bottlenecks. So they are also starting to see in practice, be in the trenches and notice like what this means in practice and recalibrate their ways. We've also had clients who kind of give us full reign on everything and only want to do code reviews, right? Some of the projects we do are outcome based, which is exactly what they want. Like you all figure out, that's why we hire a company like Thoughtworks. We're just interested in the outcome, but we want to do code review. In such places, we were able to kind of glean their best practices, their organizational way of doing certain things, and kind of build agent around it and say, hey, client, I know we have done 5 code reviews with you. You seem to be catching similar patterns. We have corrected, but we'll avoid this work for you going forward. And here's an agent you have written here. Look at the markdown. This is exactly what the LLM is doing. And they were cool. Like, yes, like less work for us. We are perfectly fine. There is this aspect of change management. Again, change, you can't just coach someone into change, you can't just talk someone into change. You kind of have to create that awareness and show it in practice.
Very interesting. Where have you seen sort of like these teams accepting that, okay, we don't need to do these reviews in such detail? Like, what are they choosing as an alternative? Is it like sort of like, are they relying more on these agentic reviews? Where are the blind spots? Like, so for instance, we are also with our verification platform, we have like this concept of AI slop register, which is like, there are things which in systems cannot always catch, but like, you're repeatedly kind of like possibly reporting the same issues. Can you actually like start building a register of these issues and that gets catched automatically? So kind of like, this is just like one thought process, but like I would love to hear have you seen sort of like patterns changing? Obviously, like everyone is feeling the pressure to do reviews, um, but some of it is also, I would say, emotional to some degree, right? Like because in some ways people own different parts of the code bases, they don't want that people be submitting changes there without their review.
I would say it's a time of reckoning for them also, right? Again, some of these practices that people have been blogging about, talking about for years, is coming to fruition now. One thing is collective code ownership. Right? We've always said like one person in the team should not have all the knowledge and the work should not come to a standstill should that person win lottery. right? But no one works towards that. We are very happy with that one person being the one person who has all the context and enjoys the attention. We do not want that. So this idea of collective ownership is also coming into fruition in that, like, everything everyone knew in their head is kind of going into a markdown or going into a knowledge graph and being fed as context to whatever LLM that's doing the work for us. So the idea of collective ownership is kind of coming back in fashion, so to speak, such that we can get more mileage out of the evidence. The other thing that I've started noticing is there are only so many markdown files and instructions and skills and hooks that we can write in the coding stage, right? There is still a lot of learning. This intelligent system that's sitting in our IDE can learn beyond that also. Again, it all comes to the concept of what Brigitte Butler from Thoughtworks is coining as harness engineering. You harness your system so well before writing code and after your code is deployed so that the amount of review one individual human being has to do is drastically reduced, right? That's one angle of doing it. The other was the visualization. Give all the information a human's gonna need to do the review and let them do the review like they always did. What if we flip the coin and say, you don't have to, there are so many checks and balances in place. You're kind of being human in the loop, approving what has happened is okay, right? So the idea of harness engineering is one, you harness in the ID stage when you write code, and you also feed back the signals that you see in your pipelines, right? When you run the linters, when you run the security scanners, or when you catch abnormal behavior in your ISD or DAS systems. All of that can be fed back because, again, even though it's called IDE, it can still learn. Those things are a lot more intelligent than they were. So the idea of harnessing before writing code, which is feed fast and feedback to make your system faster in order to reduce toil, is also an idea that's exciting to people who actually review, because now it's becoming an overhead to review. It's no longer joyful. Uh, for some folks, it's no longer the ego stroke that they used to getting. It's just a lot of work at this point.
Very interesting. Tell us more about like harness engineering. So how does that fit into the existing ecosystem? Do teams need to build some sort of like a feedback mechanism? Is it like getting auto ingested as sort of like more reviews are happening or more code is written? Or is it sort of like, teams sit together occasionally and sort of like write bunch of like documents?
I hope that's not it. Yeah. So the way I simply explain to my teams is it's just platform engineering for the AI days, right? We all
Hmm.
have platforms. We know how our pipeline should look. What are the security gates that must be there? What are the checks? And the number of stages a pipeline should have, depending on the kind of industry, the kind of software you build. Just apply a AI schema on top of it is how I simply explain to my teams. Meaning, for example, you can have Cloud Code in your GitHub as a GitHub action in your pipeline,
Hmm.
right? So perfect. That is a way to say, like, hey, Cloud Code, every piece of code that you keep emitting has this peculiar security scan when security vulnerability. When I do Sonar Queue, feed it back to the agent that's writing code, then you kind of stop having those repeated errors or repeated patterns showing up. So these are all things that happens in the platform layer, which we never did before. That's not the level of hardening we
Okay.
did in the past. It was always like feedback forward, right? If your test fail, you stop. That's it. You never had to give it back to the thing that wrote your code, because it was not a thing that wrote your code. It was a human who wrote the code. So we just looked at logs or alerts from our pipeline and we manually corrected. Just think of it as an agent receiving those and being able to correct and not making those mistakes again and again. So the idea of harnessing your pipeline and idea of harnessing your IDE together forms this practice of harness engineering. Again, it is a practice that's evolving, but it's only a natural progression of, hey, we have done platform engineering for years. How's platform engineering going to evolve for AI days? Because we're going to be producing so much more code. that's going to flow through the pipeline, and who's going to catch it, how are we going to catch it, and all of that good stuff has led to the practice of harness engineering. Again, it's quite new. I would say the first time I heard it was January-ish, and the first time it got published on the internet this sometime in Feb. Brigida has the definition of harness engineering at this point. I haven't seen others come up with other definition because I think it's perfect at this point. So platforms where the answer is, that's where we are going to put a lot of our harness platforms. What carried a lot of our engineering discipline for a long time. So this is platform engineering for the AI era. That's how I'm thinking harness engineering is.
Nice. So, kind of like, one of the things that I have, like, we've been talking also in our community is this whole aspect of up until now, we were building software by hand. And now we are actually building software with machines. So
Yes.
this is somewhat similar to, in some ways, the Industrial Revolution. And I think the teams who are actually doing well are the ones who are investing into building better machines.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of like one way of thinking about the harness engineering you're saying. It's like, instead of thinking about building software, think about building machines that build software.
Yep, that's it. Yes, yeah. The Anthropics and OpenAIs have given us a way to do it, but it's
Right.
still on the engineering teams to assemble it, guardrail it, harness it, and kind of not let it become wild west. Because we know once it happens, it's hard to turn that ship.
Right. In a way, kind of like I also feel like almost what platform engineering started, like even as a movement like 10 years ago, today, or like at least in the future, almost every company needs a very big platform team. In fact, most of their engineering would probably be platform team, right? And then there is like a product team that actually leverages it. But because the most of the effort would be required in the platform team to maintain the infrastructure,
Yes.
product teams get like 10x the value from each like individual, right? So in some ways, like I feel like the teams themselves will be more skewed towards platform in large teams.
100%. A colleague of mine and I were building a team topology diagram for a client engagement. So there's always this platform layer, right? So far has been delivery infrastructure. Whether it's a CI/CD team or the cloud infrastructure team. That's been the extent of that team's responsibility. We started drawing an entirely different box, still called it platform, and it's like this is the agentic developer plan, right? This is where the straitjacketing of developers to use the right framework, to use the right models, and to have your cost controls. All of that's in place, right? We drew an entirely different box, and we were thinking like, no, it won't be two different boxes for too long. It's going to compress into one platform, right? That does like all of these things, CI/CD, your runtime infrastructure, and all the guardrails for agentic development. Except it's going to go farther left into our software development lifecycle because previously it always started with the first commit. Commit and thereon is the platform. But now the definition of where the platform can reach is going to go farther left, and it's exciting to see how platform's going to evolve. Because I would say earlier last year or even before that, I would always reach out to my platform friends and say, hey, what are you doing in AI space? What are you doing in AI space? That space has always been like it's pretty automated. There's not a lot of AI application there, right? There's not a lot of manual hand coding to be done. So that space until now has been less impacted by all the AI influence. Now that AI code is generated at large, now everyone's like, oh my gosh, platform engineering. That's where our answer is. That's where all the controls, all the straitjacketing is going to happen, and that's the platform engineering. The next evolution of platform engineering is going to be, I think. It's very exciting to think how platforms going to evolve now. Now is the time, right? 1 year ago, no one would have thought like platform engineering has to evolve. Now we know. Now we know because of the amount of code we are producing and all the like we it's a lived experience. Now we know platform engineering is going to matter.
Right, right. And I think in some ways, kind of just taking the analogy of like, factories and machines itself, like almost every company will have to build their sort of like customization of their own factories, right? It's not like every company will use the same factory. Like, no matter which model company produces it, like you still need to customize it and own it yourself.
As much as people want software to be commodity, there's always going to be this small little thing that a project needs, and
Right.
I don't think it'll ever be a commodity.
So I do want to touch on one more topic, which is around AI code reviews. So I have like this opinion that AI code reviews should not really exist in a UI. So, for
In a
instance,
what?
like in a UI
Okay.
interface. So, for instance, like most of the AI code review systems like sit on top of GitHub or like GitLab, and they kind of
Yeah.
like provide you feedback, and then maybe an agent looks at it and kind of like argues and kind of like either make changes or kind of like pushes back. I feel like that type of theater doesn't need interface. In some ways, some of like these things should further shift left. Kind of like,
Hmm.
as agent is building these things, like
Yeah.
maybe there's another adversarial agent which is kind of like providing some feedback and guidance. By the time you do a review, like it should really, most of these things should have already been settled.
Yes.
Like, how have you seen sort of like AI review as a category?
Remember the one story I told about the client wanting to do review, and we wrote an agent for said review. So it all started with using Claude Code. I created the first version. My desire was mostly to educate the team before they get that code in its uncooked, completely natural form to the client. I have vested interest in my team looking their best in front of the client. So I wrote that agent, and it was not really code review. It was purely catch anti-patterns and explain it to the developer like you would explain the developer's archetype, right? Like I know it's my team's archetype. So review this code, review it against these practices that's in conference document, explain where my team is doing differently or where they're deviating, explain the deviation and why the deviation is going to be detrimental. So I kind of built it as a teaching agent more than a code review agent. It kind of evolved into a code review agent. Then what you said occurred to me. It's not something we should be catching way later when the commit has happened. Code review, whether it's human or an agent doing, has to happen much earlier, and it doesn't have to be reviewed. It could be rubber ducking or a teaching moment. It also gives the developer space to ask those stupid, dumb questions to an LLM, which so far hasn't started judging us yet. So yes, pull them all as left as possible so that the amount of work you have to do for them down is a lot less. And yes, absolutely yes to the UI, especially for someone who can't stand dips for too long. Yes, the UI mechanism it only goes so far.
I mean,
Yeah.
and also like not to forget that it actually puts pressure on your CI systems as well, right?
Yeah.
Because like by the time you send something for review, it's already expected that you're running your CIs, and then kind of like the more iterations you
Hmm.
loads that are increased.
And
No,
I've
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I've also noticed something else, which is all things front end. I have a fair bit of teams that do the front end work and the mobile
Mhm.
development work. What has kind of fundamentally shifted is their ability to visualize changes with tools of these times, like what you get in Figma these days, what you get in Replit. You're able to uh, build concepts, build prototypes faster, and the assets from the prototyping stage could very well be developer ready, right? So the idea of code reviewing for UX and UI changes has also started shifting because you're able to visualize them using other tools.
Actually, this is something which we are also using a lot in our own concepts of verification. Code may look right, but if we are able to do end-to-end verification by spinning up the servers, like sending the traffic, or maybe sort of like doing some human clicks, like a lot of these things today agents are actually capable of, right? So our thesis is also, can we actually provide enough evidence that like when the reviewer is looking at it, they're only looking at, is the evidence make sense,
Yeah.
is the intent make sense? And those are the things how we can actually align better, instead of like having to review each change line by line.
What you said reminded me, like, don't you think code review is starting to kind of blend into or bleed into all things testing, which is regression testing. Some of what you said is like, yeah, like that's what regression test is for.
Absolutely.
And the enforcement layer in the platform, and like the responsibility of code review keeps shrinking and shrinking, right? Like before we were able to do all the SAST and DAST and IAST and Sonar cubes in the pipeline, those were some of the things I remember you doing as a lead developer, right? Like I would memorize the OASP 10 and look for it in code. Didn't have to do it anymore. So the responsibilities kind of starting to blend into other activities we do, and it's kind of getting like thinner and thinner is what I think.
Right, right. I think
Uh,
that's probably like a good way to also like, conclude this, which is in some ways, I do feel like I is giving us an opportunity to reduce the toil
yep.
from the review part of it and actually keep the collaboration and keep the judgment part of it still alive for the reviews. I think there's definitely a lot to be built, a lot to be thought through. But the good thing is today, at least, everyone is open to new ideas.
Yes. Yes. We all are forced to shed our old beliefs and just be open to new ideas. 100%.
Right. Okay, cool. Awesome. Vanita, this was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time jamming on this topic. And thank
Yes.
you everyone who was listening. If you're interested in developer experience or work in DevOps, join us in Hangar DX. It's dx.community. We do sessions like these, also virtually in group sessions. So again, thank you, Vanita, so much for your time.
Yes. Thanks, Ankit. Thanks for the opportunity.